Hello everyone, this is Dr. Haytham again. Today we will have the fourth practical session in this semester and the third one in the region of the thorax. This practical will be divided into 4 sessions. The first session will be about the superior mediastinum. The second session will be about the posterior mediastinum. The third and the fourth session will be about the lungs, the right one first and then the left lung. As we have said in our last practical, the region of the thorax or the thoracic cavity is divided into 2 lateral cavities known as the pleural cavities containing the lungs and a middle compartment known as the mediastinum. This compartment, the mediastinum, is divided by an imaginary line running from the angle of Lewis into the lower border of the 4th thoracic vertebra. The part that lies above this line is known as the superior mediastinum, and the one lies below this line is known as the inferior mediastinum. The inferior mediastinum is further subdivided into an anterior mediastinum, anterior to the precardium, posterior mediastinum, posterior to the precardium, and a middle mediastinum containing the heart and the precardium. So, let us start our practical by looking at the superior mediastinum. The superior mediastinum is bounded anteriorly by the manubrium sterni, and the lower border of the superior mediastinum is an imaginary line from this point, which is the angle of Lewis, going backward into the lower border of the 4th thoracic vertebra. If we removed the anterior chest wall and we started to look at the superior mediastinum, first we will encounter the veins. Those are the left brachiocephalic and the left and the right brachiocephalic veins. The left brachiocephalic vein is formed by the union of the left subclavian and the left internal jugular veins, accompanied by the left external jugular vein. Then the left brachiocephalic vein crosses the midline to meet the right brachiocephalic veins, which is formed similarly from the right subclavian and the right internal jugular. When the left and the right brachiocephalic veins meet, they form the superior vena cava. The superior vena cava goes downward to enter the right atrium, and before entering the right atrium is joined by this vein from behind. This vein is known as the azygos vein. Here it is, the azygos vein joining the superior vena cava, and then the superior vena cava enters the right atrium. To the left of the superior vena cava is the ascending thoracic aorta. The ascending aorta bends to form the arch of the aorta. The arch of the aorta gives 3 branches: the brachiocephalic trunk, the left common carotid artery, and the left subclavian artery. The brachiocephalic trunks divide to give the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian artery. Below the arch of the aorta is this structure, which is known as the ligamentum arteriosum, that connects the arch of the aorta to the pulmonary trunk, and this is a remnant of the ductus arteriosus in the fetal life. The vagus nerve, this is the left one, the left vagus nerve, descends lateral to the mediastinum, anterior to the arteries, and then it goes behind the root of the lung. Here is the left lung root, and here is the vagus nerve going behind the lung root. Here it gives this branch, which is an important branch known as the recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is the left one, the left recurrent laryngeal nerve that hooks below the arch of the aorta and the ligamentum arteriosum to ascend back into the neck. Here I am pulling it from the neck. The right vagus nerve have a similar pathway, but the only difference is that it gives this branch, the right recurrent laryngeal nerve, higher up in the region of the neck, and it hooks below the right subclavian artery, and then the rest of the nerve descends below, posterior to the lung root. Here is the right lung root, and here is the vagus nerve going behind the right lung root to reach the esophagus. The phrenic nerve runs anterior to the arteries and lateral to the vagus nerve. Here is the phrenic nerve, and here is the vagus nerve, and it descends anterior to the lung root. Here is the left lung root, and here is the left phrenic nerve, and it's seen going between the fibrous precardium and the mediastinal part of the parietal pleura. Is accompanied here by this vessel, which is known as the precardiophrenic vessels. Then the phrenic nerve descends into the diaphragm. The trachea, with its C-shaped cartilages, divides at the level of the sternal angle into a right, shorter, wider, and relatively straight main bronchus, right main bronchus, and a left, longer, narrower, and more oblique left main bronchus. The right main bronchus enters the right lung, and the left main bronchus enters the left lung. The inferior mediastinum lies below the imaginary line drawn from the angle fluis to the lower border of the fourth thoracic vertebra. It's divided by the heart and the precardium into an anterior mediastinum anterior to the heart, between the heart and the anterior chest wall, a middle mediastinum containing the heart and the precardium, and a posterior mediastinum posterior to the heart. The anterior mediastinum contains the thymus and it's very difficult to demonstrate the thymus in an adult, so this will not be dealt with anymore. The middle mediastinum, which is the heart and the pericardium, will be discussed in the next practical session. And today we will discuss the posterior mediastinum. Here we can see the esophagus descending downward from the superior mediastinum to be in the inferior mediastinum. In the superior mediastinum, it was the most posterior structure, and here it lies just behind the heart and the pericardium. The esophagus is accompanied by the two vagi, one anterior to it, which is the left one, and the other one lying posterior to it, which is the right one. If we track the esophagus, we will find the esophageal hiatus of the diaphragm, which lies here at the level of the 10th thoracic vertebra. So here is the esophagus, here is the right vagus nerve, and here is the left vagus nerve. Behind the esophagus is the descending thoracic aorta, which is found to be tucking itself between the esophagus and the thoracic vertebrae. The descending thoracic aorta enters the diaphragm at the level of the 12th thoracic vertebra. To the right of the aorta and behind the esophagus is this lymphatic duct, which is known as the thoracic duct. This is the longest lymphatic duct in the body, and lateral to the thoracic duct is the azygous vein. Here we can see the intercostal veins entering the posterior intercostal veins entering the azygous vein, and the posterior intercostal arteries getting out of the descending thoracic aorta. So here are the veins, and here are the posterior intercostal arteries. The duct lies between the azygous vein and the aorta. Here we can see this chain, which is the sympathetic chain, and here we can see the intercostal nerves related to this sympathetic chain. This is the right lung. The right lung has a convex apex pointing superiorly, a concave base resting on the right dome of the diaphragm and having the shape of the right dome of the diaphragm, a sharp anterior border, and a blunt posterior border, a large convex costal surface with the impressions of the rib, and a medial or mediastinal surface facing the mediastinum from the right side. In the mediastinal surface, we have many structures and impressions. Most posteriorly, we have the right main bronchus is seen here dividing into two branches. Just anterior to it is the pulmonary artery, and with the pulmonary vein lying anteriorly and inferiorly. So we have the right main bronchus most posteriorly, the pulmonary artery in the middle between the bronchus and the vein, and another branch of the vein inferiorly. Above to those structures, we have this impression caused by the azygous vein, and here is an impression caused by the right brachiocephalic vein and the superior vena cava, with the azygos going into the superior vena cava. Below and anterior to those structures is a small cardiac impression. Here we have this ligament, which is called the pulmonary ligament. Behind the pulmonary ligament is a small impression caused by the esophagus. So we have the bronchus, the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein, cardiac impression, impression of the azygous vein, superior vena cava and right brachiocephalic vein, and lastly the esophageal impression behind the pulmonary ligament. The right lung has two fissures, the oblique fissure and the horizontal fissure, dividing it into three loops: superior, middle and inferior loops. If we put the right lung in situ, we will find the phrenic nerve going anterior to the hilum and the vagus nerve going posterior to the hilum. In the left lung, we have the same features of the right lung, with a convex apex pointing superiorly, a concave diaphragmatic surface resting on the left dome of the diaphragm and having the shape of the dome, a sharp anterior border pointing anteriorly, a blunt posterior or vertebral border, a large costal surface with the impressions of the ribs on it, and a medial or mediastinal surface. In this mediastinal surface, we can see the bronchus being most posteriorly as usual. Anterior to it, we will find the pulmonary vein, one anteriorly and another one inferiorly. But here we have the pulmonary artery lying superior to the bronchus. This is the bronchus, and this is the pulmonary artery, which lies above the bronchus, unlike in the right lung. So again, here is the left main bronchus. Here is a pulmonary artery dividing into two branches. Here is the pulmonary vein with one anterior to the bronchus and the other one inferior to the bronchus. We can see this deep impression, which is caused by the aorta, the arch, and the descending thoracic aorta. Anterior to it is this impression caused by the esophagus. Here is a large impression caused by the heart, which is called as the cardiac impression. And here we have another impression getting out of the aorta, which is the left subclavian artery impression. Anterior to it, we may find the left brachiocephalic vein impression, and anterior to it, we may find the impression of the first rib. So again, we have the left main bronchus, the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein, the aortic impression of the arch and descending aorta, the esophageal impression, the cardiac impression, and the left subclavian artery impression. The left lung has one fissure, which is the oblique fissure, dividing it into two loops, superior and inferior loops.